The Republican Party is now overtly a Christian nationalist party. Now, the important word here is overtly, because they've actually been a Christian nationalist party for a long time. Think back, you may recall, during the lead up and during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, then President George W. Bush said that God came to him with tears in his eyes and said, "Sir," no, I added that part. God came to him and said, "You should do this. You should invade." Many times we hear policy supported or opposed by Republicans on the basis of what is in the particular sacred text that their particular religion follows. All of these are elements of how these Republicans would like to see the country run. And the way they would like to see the country run is with a sort of mix of government and Christianity. Now, it's not just government and religion generally. It's not government and Islam. It's not government and Judaism, although they will kowtow to that by saying our Judeo-Christian values. Although remember that Jews are the most behind black folks' liberal voting group in the United States, sometimes as liberal as black folks. So the idea of Judeo-Christian values is actually a cover. It's a red herring, and they've been doing it for decades. So the word overtly is the important word because now they are brazen enough to just say it. And we've talked before about what do we mean by Christian nationalism? Christian nationalism is the belief that the United States as a country is defined by Christianity, that the government should actively keep the country Christian and keep Christianity at the center of government. Many Christian nationalists will actually say that it would no longer be America if it were no longer a Christian nation, and that Christianity should have a privileged position in the public square. And it does, by the way. I mean, at a very superficial level, one religion gets federal holidays, and that's Christianity. That's the one out of hundreds or thousands of religions. That's the one, and thus it does have a privileged place in American society already. They used to have to be a little bit more subtle in their Christian nationalism, but no more. Here are some examples from just the last few weeks. Here's Donald Trump over the weekend in Tampa, Florida at the Turning Point USA event, talking about Americans kneel to God. We are Americans and we kneel to God. Well, not everybody does, actually. And some kneel to different gods or no God at all.
We will not break. We will not yield. We will never give in. We will never give up. We will never, ever, ever back down. As long as we are confident and united, the tyrants we are fighting do not stand a chance. Because we are Americans, and Americans kneel to God and God alone.
We also looked at Marjorie Taylor Greene, radical Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying, "I'm a Christian nationalist. That's not bad. It's actually a good thing."
Now, if the Republican Party becomes a party that actually does the things we say we're about, then we are going to be a party for nationalism. Isn't that right?
Wow. I mean, she's not wrong, right? Like, it's true. They talk about the importance of Christianity in civil government, and she's saying we shouldn't just talk about it, we should act on it. And she's accurately assessing that if they acted on the things they said, we're talking about a Christian nationalist country.
But then I think there's another element we need to have, and I'm a Christian. How many Christians do we have here?
Yeah.
Myself a Christian nationalist, and that's not a bad word. That's actually a good thing, right? And there's nothing wrong with leading with your faith, because we should lead with our faith, because if we're doing that, then we're doing the right thing. It doesn't mean we're perfect, it just means we're doing the right thing.
Okay. And then also Lauren Boebert. I mean, it's all a very, very similar line. Lauren Boebert at some backyard, farm speech, or, who knows where this was, saying that it is actually important for churches to teach how to influence and direct government.
And I believe that great patriots all throughout this nation and Christians will begin to position themselves in these days, in these times, that pastors would have a boldness to speak
And then even more overtly, she's tired of this separation of church and state junk. And I know some of you have seen this clip a couple of times now, but it's important to include it here because it is so overt.
The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
Now, it actually is right there, and it is one of the top line elements of the structure of the United States. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's right there. And they love to play these games with, well, it's not really what the founders meant, and they were all religious, and they were Christian, and so on and so forth. This is one of the most dangerous movements currently going, and unfortunately, it has more oxygen than it has in a very long time. They openly now are touting this ideology, Christian revolt, revival, Christian nationalism, using their religiosity to justify homophobia, to justify transphobia, to justify sometimes racism, to justify demeaning or putting in positions, subservient positions, other religions, which is certainly not what the founding fathers meant. So this is another layer. You've got, to go back a little bit, we have like the neocon spread democracy layer of right-wing-ism. That's less present right now, but it could come back at any time. That was more under like the Bush administration. You have the sort of wacky, reactionary Trumpist layer to this right-wing movement, which is still present and may come back full force depending on what happens in 2022 and in 2024. But then you have the Christian nationalist element, which is just as dangerous, and it is so fundamentally at odds with what the United States is supposed to be. So what do we do? Well, we've got to vote. I mean, I know it's at this point, it feels almost like not enough, and also like, really, that's also the solution there? Yeah. I mean, if these people aren't in power, they can't do it. It's that simple. And of course, they're trying to, between gerrymandering and election manipulation, I guess is what we're calling it now, they are trying to take control even when they don't win. So just another reason why the 2022 midterms are arguably the most important that I can remember. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but it is important just to follow up with some of these things. You might remember that when Cassidy Hutchinson, who worked with Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, when Cassidy Hutchinson testified before the January 6th committee and made a number of different explosive claims about Donald Trump and Secret Service and all of these different things, there were anecdotally messages, statements from Secret Service saying that's not true and we're willing to testify under oath. And the January 6th committee said, great, come in and testify under oath. And then they didn't. Why haven't they done it? Well, we have to sort of speculate a little bit, but here is Adam Kinzinger, one of the few Republicans on the January 6th committee, saying, we haven't been able to talk to them. I mean, listen, they said we'll talk to you, and they just don't come in.
So we want answers to that. We heard through anonymous sources in the media that the Secret Service agents, present when Cassidy Hutchinson talked about the heated argument in the limo, the president's beast, that they were eager to talk to us. We haven't been able to talk to them yet either. We have our doors wide open. They just have to do it under oath. So that on top of, again, we just have a lot of people coming forward with pieces of the puzzle, maybe pieces of information. Maybe Cassidy Hutchinson or Sarah Matthews inspired them. And so we're going to work on beginning to write our report, but keep this investigation wide open and getting more and more information.
So listen, they all came forward. A bunch of them came forward and they said, we're willing to testify. Secret Service agent reportedly willing to testify. Trump did not lunge at him. This is from The Guardian, and this was right after the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson. And then a bunch of different other media outlets reported on this. CNN and other outlets reported the pushback on the alleged Secret Service incident from Tony Ornato, also a deputy chief of staff in the Trump White House, Robert Engel, Trump's security chief, and on and on and on. And the committee members said, we welcome you to be here under oath, of course. And but really, Cassidy Hutchinson was under oath. What is the value of Secret Service agents showing up not under oath and refuting the claims? Let's get everybody under oath, so then we can actually say we have conflicting under oath statements. We continue to have only one set of claims made under oath. And of course, it wasn't surprising to me. I've been tweeting about it for weeks. They haven't testified. Why haven't they testified? We don't know. They're law enforcement. One would think they don't have an issue in principle with being under oath. But if you won't testify under oath about the things you saw while working for the Secret Service, to me, that's a red flag. And of course, in courts of law, we don't consider people's silence as indicative of guilt. But when you come out and you say, we'll testify, we'll talk about it, we didn't see what Cassidy Hutchinson said, and then you're welcomed, great, show up, take an oath just like she did and tell us what you saw, and then they're missing. It is completely reasonable in the court of public opinion to say, maybe they weren't telling the truth and maybe Cassidy Hutchinson is. One other note on the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony. Pat Cipollone, the former White House counsel, in his under oath testimony, he didn't dispute the things that Cassidy Hutchinson said. With some, he claimed privilege, attorney-client privilege with Donald Trump. With some, he did a sort of, I don't recall, or I can't necessarily speak to that, but he went under oath and didn't refute any of the things that Cassidy Hutchinson said. So still waiting for the Secret Service agents to come in. Not surprising that they haven't, and I don't expect them to. Follow me on Twitter at dpacman. Let me know what you make of the latest absence of Secret Service agents who were just weeks ago so ready to testify. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpacman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpacman.com. The David Pakman Show is a viewer and listener-supported program. Please consider yourselves invited to sign up at joinpacman.com. We do an extra show every single day for our members called The Bonus Show. We also offer a commercial-free audio and video feed of the show every day to our members, including making it available 5 or 6 hours earlier than the show is published to everybody else. And you also get priority access to David Pakman Show town halls like the one we are holding tonight, July 26th at 6 p.m. Eastern. I hope to see many of you there. You can sign up at joinpacman.com. I have 2 clips that I'm going to play for you here that are, one, very, very significant in terms of what it suggests is happening legally in Washington, D.C. right now, and 2, one which is just absolutely hilarious. It's a sort of mic drop moment related to Matt Gaetz and his alleged child sex trafficking. The videos involve an individual named Mark Short. Now, Mark Short was former Vice President Mike Pence's former chief of staff. He, we have now learned, has been brought under subpoena and testified before a Washington, D.C. federal grand jury investigating January 6th. Why is this a big deal? It's a big deal. I'm not quizzing you. I'll tell you. I don't ask it rhetorically. It's a big deal because as the January 6th House Committee has been doing its work, we've been wondering aloud, is the Department of Justice investigating any or some or all of the things that we've learned from the January 6th Committee? Or are they even seriously investigating at a higher level the events of January 6th? We know that there are hundreds of individual defendants for their personal roles on January 6th. But there's a broader question as to whether the bigger picture of the way that Trump and the people around him incited the riots is being investigated by Merrick Garland. The fact that Mark Short was under subpoena and appeared before a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C., at least suggests that the answer is yes. So the funny clip is the second one. Let's look at this first. He didn't say much, but this is a major confirmation.
I can confirm that I did receive a subpoena for the federal grand jury, and I complied with that subpoena, but under advice of counsel, I really can't say much more than that. That was my only appearance before the grand jury. I'm not going to comment on what others on the team have had to testify or not regarding subpoenas and what they've testified to.
This suggests, it doesn't prove, but it certainly suggests, and what else might it mean? It's hard to think of something else. This indicates that the federal government, the Justice Department, is now investigating January 6th at a bigger and higher level than simply individuals who were at the Capitol on that day. That's a major, major thing. Also, during an interview with CNN, Short was asked about Matt Gaetz's comments over the weekend, and Short delivers an absolutely brutal takedown of Gaetz. The look on CNN anchor Aaron Burnett's face sort of says it all here. Check this out.
Our America is proudly ultra MAGA, not some low energy roadside rhino safari. On that note, let me just say what everybody here knows. Mike Pence will never be president. Nice guy, not a leader.
Mark?
Well, I don't know if Mike Pence will run for president in 2024, but I don't think Matt Gaetz will have an impact on that. In fact, I'd be surprised if he was still voting. It's more likely he'll be in prison for child sex trafficking by 2024. And I'm actually surprised that Florida law enforcement still allows him to speak to teenage conferences like that. So I'm not too worried about Matt Gaetz. Thanks.
Yeah, shocking that law enforcement even allows Matt Gaetz around people under age 18. So listen, absolutely hilarious, perfectly delivered, and in all seriousness, Matt Gaetz might get away with absolutely nothing happening to him and no consequences whatsoever for the alleged crimes that he has been involved in. The question is, what the hell is taking so long? I actually remember when I first learned that Matt Gaetz was under investigation for child sex trafficking, it was March of 2021. I remember because it was my first trip sort of like in the COVID era. I remember exactly where I was. I was about to go out to the beach and I glanced at my phone and saw Gaetz is now under investigation. And it was the night that Gaetz appeared on Tucker Carlson's show and gave that bizarre interview where he was like, Tucker, you've met the woman supposedly I trafficked. Remember, we went to dinner. And Tucker was like, I have no memory of that whatsoever. Don't pull me into this thing. That was the start of it. That was now 16 months ago. 16 months ago. So is it unusual that it can take this long for investigations to be done? No, it's not unusual. Is it starting to get to the point where it's reasonable to wonder what's going on? And are they even going to charge Gaetz with anything? Yes, it is getting to that point. So good for Mark Short for just saying what we're all thinking. How is this guy even still around, allowed around young girls? Absolutely well delivered, and it's all great and everything. But it is not obvious to me whatsoever that there are actually going to be any consequences for Matt Gaetz. And of course, these are alleged things that he did. If the evidence doesn't show that he did them, then he should not be charged. This is not a show where I demand people be charged for things they didn't do. What we're aware of is that Matt Gaetz, alleged co-conspirator, certainly has acknowledged doing a whole bunch of the stuff that he and Gaetz are accused of. And so now it starts to stretch our credulity when we say, well, so the other guy did all this stuff and he's admitting it, but we're supposed to believe Gaetz actually wasn't involved in it when it's abundantly clear that they know each other and that they were involved in this stuff together. It starts to get hard to believe, but we will follow it, and hopefully Mark Short is correct. We talked last week about Fox News starting to set up support of Ron DeSantis for president in 2024, support for Ron DeSantis as the Republican nominee in 2024, and an abandonment, a bailing out, an escape from support for former President Donald Trump. And we played some clips, in fact, from Fox News that indicated that they're not saying we would support a Democrat over Trump, but Fox News seems to be very clearly positioning itself to support someone other than Trump in the primary. Donald Trump has now completely flipped out on Fox and Friends because Fox and Friends simply acknowledged there are polls that show Ron DeSantis ahead of Donald Trump for the 2024 Republican primary. They didn't even say, we prefer DeSantis. They didn't say Trump sucks. They didn't say, sir, we don't want you anymore. They just said there are polls in which DeSantis is leading. And Trump raging on Truth Central at Fox and Friends. So let's look first at the clip. And this is so milquetoast. This is so banal. It's just, there are polls that say DeSantis is doing better.
You've got people from all across the country convening in Tampa. I am thinking about that is a little different than a couple of other polls that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago in Florida, Blueprint polling did a poll. DeSantis leads the former president in all age groupings. Then there was a University of New Hampshire poll in June. DeSantis actually led Trump 39-37. And that New York Times Siena college poll that we've cited quite a few times, less than half of Republican voters back Donald Trump as their preferred choice. So it's like the young people who are activists at that event, like the former president, but looking at these other polls, different answer.
Yeah, if you look state by state, Ron DeSantis is showing tremendous strength in New Hampshire, Michigan, and Florida.
Tremendous strength.
He's leading or tied with the former president. And Turning Point, run by Charlie Kirk, extremely impressive organization, and they are extremely enthusiastic and active.
Yeah. So pretty milquetoast, guys. It's like Trump's doing well in some places, but DeSantis is well in others. And there's some polls in which DeSantis is either tied or leading. That's just what it is. These are just facts. And Donald Trump triggered on his platform, Truth Social, Truth Central, by any suggestion that maybe someone in the Republican Party might vote for somebody else. Trump posting almost immediately, Fox and friends just really botched my poll numbers, no doubt on purpose. Why would they botch it on purpose? Well, I guess if you think that they're starting to build a campaign against you, you would think that. That show has been terrible, gone to the dark side. They quickly quote the big Turning Point poll victory of almost 60 points over the number 2 Republican, and then hammer me with outliers. Actually, almost all polls have me leading all Republicans and Biden by a lot. Rhino Paul Ryan, one of the weakest and worst speakers ever, must be running the place. Anyway, thank you to Turning Point. The crowd and love was amazing. This is exactly what we've been hoping for. Fracture the party, let them tear themselves apart, destroy the party. And an important reminder on this Fox News thing. Just because Fox is setting itself up to probably turn on Trump and support DeSantis in the Republican primary, that doesn't actually mean Fox News, number one, has the power to turn the Republican Party against Donald Trump. And it also doesn't mean that if Trump is the nominee in 24, that Fox won't get in line and support him over whoever is the Democratic nominee. Obviously, they will. Let's take those two things one at a time. In 2016, Donald Trump won the Republican primary with Fox against him from the get-go. It was a long primary in 2016 for the Republican Party. It started in 2015, in fact, and there were 16 candidates, some large number of candidates. Donald Trump started polling almost nothing early. Fox News did not support Trump for the absolute longest time. Eventually, when Donald Trump had gained a bunch of momentum by attrition as the 1-3% candidates dropped out, and Trump was able to start coalescing support, and the evangelicals eventually reluctantly came over to Trump after he told some story about how he's against abortion now, Fox News eventually acquiesced. But they were against Trump, and Trump still won. So first of all, it's not clear Fox really has the power to torpedo the Trump candidacy in the Republican primary. Secondly, Trump is going to continue doing his rallies, finding ways to reach most of his base, even without Fox News necessarily on his side, even without being on Twitter. So that's not going to be a problem. And maybe the most important thing is, in the end, Fox News is going to get in line. And Fox News will get in line for two reasons. One, Fox can't support a Democrat. That would completely torpedo their brand. That wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So Fox actually really has no choice of eventually supporting whoever is the Republican nominee. Even if the Republican nominee were eventually like an overt white nationalist or something like that, Fox would still not support the Democrat. They might maybe not super aggressively support the Republican candidate. Maybe they would. But Fox has a business model that's based on we support Republicans. And then number two, there is going to be some point at which it will be clear who the nominee is going to be. It's very unlikely that the nomination will be contested until the very end. It's just not usually that way. Usually before the media calls it, we kind of in the analysis space, reasonable people, we go, it's pretty damn clear who's going to be the nominee. And that is going to give Fox lead time to, in some credible to their audience way, it might not be credible to you and I, but in some way that is sort of credible to the Republican Fox News viewer, jump ship to whoever is going to be the nominee, because they can't lose out on access. That's one of the most important things for a network like Fox News. you have to maintain access to the Republican nominee who may eventually be the president. That's their most important thing. That's their business model. We'll have these clips on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. We will take a quick break and be right back. If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. It's great to welcome back to the program today Jack Barsky, who's a retired and reformed ex-undercover KGB agent, also author of the great book, Deep Undercover, My Secret Life and Tangled Allegiances as a KGB Spy in America, which we spoke with him about in some detail last time, and which I've read and can recommend to you. Jack, great to have you back on today.
Well, I'm delighted to be back.
So I think one of the things that would be interesting to get your thoughts on would be that there is so much speculation and pontificating on the sort of psychology of Putin and what has driven this particular invasion of Ukraine at this particular time. Everything from illness to a desire to restore the former USSR to its former glory to everything in between has been sort of cited. How are you kind of thinking about the last few months that have taken place there militarily?
Well, when you talk about the timing, he's an opportunist. He perceives weakness in the American government, and up until he did the invasion, there was quite a bit of weakness within NATO. You know, if you remember that this controversial action that Donald Trump took when he went to Europe, to NATO, and told them to pay up already and pay the share that they promised because they were all underpaying. And so Putin has never made a secret out of his long-term plan. It's just the West that didn't pay attention to it, didn't take it seriously. Particularly the U.S. intelligence services were focused on fighting terrorism and pretty much ignored what's going on in Russia. Now, we had a reset with Russia, which was asinine, and it didn't work. That was under Obama. And then Trump was, blowing smoke. But there wasn't really a recognition that there's some real chance that this is going to blow. So it was, I forgot when it was, but sometime in the late 2010s to 2015 or so, Putin actually openly declared at a conference in Europe where there were heads of state that his mission is to reinstate a greater Russia, not the Soviet Union. He is focused on the Slavic-speaking people that would eventually include Poland and the Czech Republic and a few others. But he wants, he's looking at the Russia that Peter the Great ruled. That wasn't a great country either, but it's Peter the Great is an icon in Russian history, and this is, Putin wants to be seen as the successor of Peter the Great. Good luck. Peter the Great was 6'7" tall. Putin is not, can't reach it. And most recently, 2 years ago, there was an essay was published by Russian media. It was published also in English, where and it was signed. The author is Vladimir Putin. Whether he was the author or not, it was signed. It was published in his name, where he clearly restated his long-term goal. And so when he invaded Crimea, that was 5 years ago, I believe, and the West didn't even sneeze. There was nothing going on. He said, "Well, now is the time to go into Ukraine and expand our reach." And that's pretty much my view on things.
One of the things that has surprised some is that it appears as though Russia may have misjudged the degree and the scope of Ukrainian resistance. And what seems maybe surprising about that is that Russia is known for a quite extensive intelligence service, KGB, which you're very much familiar with, other departments as well. How could something that from the outside, random people were saying, you know, there might be more resistance than is assumed. How could such an extensive intelligence apparatus misjudge that, if they did?
Well, okay, first of all, the entire world misjudged the will of the Ukrainians to fight, because nobody's really paying attention. Nobody's paying attention to history, that there has been a intrinsic hatred of Russia, everything Russian coming out of Ukraine. And one of the worst things that actually is still sticking in the Ukrainians' minds, the history where Stalin went into Ukraine in the early 30s and confiscated all the grain, and over 4 million Ukrainians starved to death. And that is in the part of the world that is the most fertile period. This was because Stalin wanted to force collectivization. And there's one thing you got to understand is, if you invade a country where everybody is a soldier, not just the men, but the women and the children, you will not, in the long run, win that war. We found it out in Vietnam. We found it out in Afghanistan. Okay? So, but with regard to intelligence services, that's a very interesting subject. I guarantee you there are undercover agents of the Ukraine in Russia and vice versa. There's a lot of misleading going on. They can, because Ukrainians are bilingual, almost all of them, and Russians have no problem learning to speak Ukrainian because it's just very, very similar. So you get intelligence. You don't know if it's real or it's from a double agent, and it goes both ways. And the other thing is, assuming that Putin got some decent intelligence, maybe his intelligence apparatus, the GRU primarily, had the right information. Did you see that tape where Putin is just treating the head of the SVR, another intelligence service, like a fourth grader?
Yes.
That guy was shaking in his boots.
Yep.
So, you know, you may not want to give the boss bad news. And if you have the courage to do so, the boss may just say, you know, you're full of shit. Sorry. So it's a very fluid situation there. And if the Russians didn't have the right intelligence, you know, you can't blame the CIA either.
Right. You know, one of the things that I gathered from reading your book and reading about other sometimes double agents, former KGB, et cetera, is that there seems to be a certain level of paranoia within the apparatus that includes, if I recall correctly, an entire department that just observes and verifies that KGB agents are not working for some other intelligence service. With that level of paranoia, what can you deduce about the images, for example, of Putin sitting 40 feet away from advisors at a table, and to talk a little bit about like the psychology of what happens behind the scenes?
The paranoia is inherited. You know that during the reign of Stalin, there were periodic purges within the military, within the intelligence services, because Stalin was the ultimate paranoid individual, and so this became part of the DNA of the Russian army and the intelligence services, because you know, when the Soviet Union fell apart and the KGB was dissolved and became three different intelligence services. Who trained the new guys? Who trained the ones that are now in charge? It's the old KGB, and they had paranoia in their blood. And in general, the Russian DNA, period, it has a paranoid gene, and that's justified. The Russian state was formed in the Middle Ages, and ever since it came into being, it was always invaded. From the north, the Vikings came in. From the east, the Mongols. From the west, it was Napoleon. And from the south, it was the Turks. So they were constantly under siege. And and that, by the way, that is a platform that, or a history that Putin is using to tell his people that whatever is wrong with Russia is it's the West's fault. It's the fault of NATO. It's the fault of the United States. And the United States and NATO can't wait to just conquer Russia and kill the Russian spirit and destroy the Russian nation. And they have bought it. They actually have bought it. And if people have ruminated in public, what would it take to get rid of Vladimir Putin? You don't even want to try, because you think you get rid of Putin that Russia will change. The Russian nation is severely contaminated, and decontamination is a hard thing to do. The Allies found that out when they tried to get the Nazi ideology out of every German brain after World War II. It took forever and was not in every case successful.
That's interesting, because while certainly what you say is true, it also seems as though even within some of Putin's top generals, they're not necessarily thrilled about this incursion into Ukraine. And to some degree, it does feel to me that if Putin was killed or died, there would not be the same interest in continuing this that there is from Putin. You think that it would not change?
Well, you're talking about the generals, and this is speculative, but it seems to make sense. The Russian army has had a lot of losses that weren't anticipated, and so if you're a general and you're involved in that invasion, you can see that the Russian army is being weakened to some degree. Okay, but there are enough hawks in the Putin regime, underneath Putin, to continue what he started. And the Russian people will not get out in the streets and demonstrate and says, stop this war. They will not, because they know it's necessary. You understand also the whole canard that Russia is fighting Nazis. It's partially true. And
in what sense?
Yes, sir. And I give you just one item, one fact that you never heard in the mainstream media. You know who Stepan Bandera was?
No.
Stepan Bandera was a Ukrainian Nazi. He led a Nazi type movement, and when Hitler came, he joined Hitler with his troops, and there were a lot of Ukrainian guards in concentration camps and Ukrainians who participated in killing Jews. Okay, that's a historic fact. So now, and here comes the interesting afterthought. 2 years ago, it was Stepan Bandera's 100th birthday. The Ukrainian government issued commemorative stamps to honor him. Now, there has to be some Nazis, right? And even up in the government. Now, Zelensky is not a Nazi for sure. And I don't believe the country is a Nazi country. But you see, if you want to sell a big lie, if you have a kernel of truth, it's so much easier to sell.
Jack, how do you see this war concluding? Because there's the idea that it will only conclude either when Putin is given an exit that allows him to save face or he dies.
It will not stop when he dies. I'm convinced this will go on for a long time, It's a war of attrition. So far, Zelensky has indicated that he's not going to give an acre of land. So unless he is willing to say, okay, I'm going to let go of Donbass because there's too many Ukrainians dying. But I have a friend who hails from that region, and he was in intelligence in Russia, and he knows, he has a really good understanding of what drives Ukrainians. They are fighting not for land; they're fighting for their freedom and for their existence as a nation. And as long as they're willing to fight to the death, that whole war is going to go on for a long time. God forbid, even if Russia takes all of Ukraine and occupies it, you know what? You're going to have a guerrilla war like in Vietnam and Afghanistan. So at this point, there's no end in sight.
So the idea that in 3 months, as a result of negotiations, this could essentially come to an end, you don't think there's even a chance of that?
They're not talking at all.
Right. But I mean, even you just don't even think that that's a plausible scenario, period.
Not in the near future, not in the next several months. The situation in the field would have to change dramatically to go one way or the other.
Is there some level of death and destruction for the Russian forces that would get Putin to say we have to cut our losses and retreat, or is that not in his DNA?
He's on a one-way street, okay, and he will pulverize the entire country if he can and has to.
Well, we've been speaking with Jack Barsky. We're linking to his book, Retired and Reformed Ex-Undercover KGB Agent. Jack, always great speaking with you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, may I just add the fact that there's
Please.
Also a podcast out there. It's called The Agent. It's an audio documentary. Is very well done. And if you don't want to read the whole book, the story is in that podcast, and it's also told not just by me, but by a lot of people who were important in my life.
That's I recommend the book, but the podcast sounds like it's a way to get a lot of the same story as well. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Follow us on social media. Interact with the David Pakman Show community. See exclusive content. See when we're taking calls live. And stay up to date on other big show announcements. We post daily. Find us on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and TikTok. So on the bonus show today, we are going to talk about Steve Bannon's conviction on 2 counts of contempt of Congress. But what I want to talk about here is that even after this conviction, and you got to say he is certainly acting with conviction, he went back on his program and started talking about shock troops deconstructing the government brick by brick. More coded language that sounds very much like an insurrectious coup. Steve Bannon calls on 4,000 shock troops to deconstruct the government brick by brick. He's back with more incendiary rhetoric against the nation days after his contempt of Congress conviction. Check out this clip and understand that he's calling for treason again. And there are people who listen to this guy and who act based on what he says. And these are not accidental phrases that he's using. This is all very specifically targeted to have a particular impact on the people that hear it. Take a listen to this.
We're talking about a Republican democracy because essentially we have taken on the model of really Davos and the Chinese Communist Party of an authoritarian state, undemocratic, with institutions that are not democratic.
Now understand that we're going to listen to the entire thing, but this is one of those, the Democrats are going to do voter fraud, and really they tried to steal an election they didn't win. One of the principles of traditional conservatism is small government. Now, we know that in many ways they never really adhered to it. They're like small government, but let's decide who can get married. Small government, but let's decide what medical procedures women can have. Okay, we know that it was BS all along. But while continuing to claim that they are against authoritarianism, they are increasingly using government as a way to achieve what they want, rather than allowing markets or public opinion or culture or whatever to make decisions. They want, whenever they see something they don't like, they want courts up to and including the Supreme Court to just make decisions that favor them. We saw this when it came to the 2020 election. Didn't win an election? Well, just start filing lawsuits and get courts and judges in the Supreme Court, if you're lucky enough, to decide that you actually get to be president anyway. When it comes to abortion, pass a ban, get the Supreme Court to overturn, ban it at the state level, ban it at the federal level, ban contraception or access to it or standard access to it without a copay as part of health insurance. They increasingly are the ones trying to use state power to achieve their goals. But Bannon insists that it's the left that wants to do that.
And state capitalism. Now, how do you combat that? You combat that by deconstructing. You have to take it apart, brick by brick.
You know, Steve, it gets my deplorable blood going on a Monday morning to hear Jonathan Swan talk about a purge of the administrative state. Now, of course, he means that to be an expose and to be a hit on our movement. We take it exactly the opposite and wear it as a badge of honor. And it tells me that, yes, Jonathan Swan recognizes that there is a plan in place, that this second Trump term is going to be far more consequential than the first one. And the first one was quite consequential.
Article 3, I'm going to get Mike, and we're going to have a 1-hour special on the Jonathan Swan Axios articles. I want everybody to understand deeply exactly what we're doing here, okay, exactly what's going on, because you're going to be part of it. And particularly want people to come and step in forward and say, hey, I want to be one of those 4,000 shock troops. Or there's going to be lots of other opportunities, Lots of opportunities for treason. Want to be a shock troop? And what exactly shock troops do, of course, is nebulous. And he's calling for treason again. And the point here of using the various euphemisms is for plausible deniability, right? Deconstruct the administrative state. Okay, well, that's just basically taking apart centers of power in government by eliminating departments. And that doesn't sound violent, does it? Well, though it's not in and of itself, but it's all part of this idea that they need shocking action. And when you talk about troops, of course, you're alluding to force and military force and weapons and all of these different things. This was a term coined by Steve Bannon. This is all meant to keep them all ginned up and at the ready to do whatever it is that you need them to do. And by them, I'm talking, of course, about the supporters, the patsies who end up prosecuted, right? Who end up prosecuted after the January 6 riots while Donald Trump flies around giving speeches. So one other clip that I want to look at here, and he's using, we're going to kill the administration in the crib. That's another phrase that Bannon loves to use. We said we'd kill this in the crib. Now, we were just a small part of it, but remember, we've been maniacally focused since we talked about we're going to kill this administration in the crib. I don't care if Benny Thompson doesn't like that, or Nancy Pelosi doesn't like it, or who doesn't like it. Justice Department, I don't care if you don't like it. Suck on it. We're destroying this illegitimate regime.
Yeah. Sort of weird, by the way, that people who claim to be pro-life, you talk about killing things in the crib as if that's a good thing to do. But let's put that aside for a moment. These are extraordinarily dangerous and violent ideas. That's one side to this. But I also don't want to ignore the likely cynical reality that there's a fundraising aspect to this thing somewhere. There is almost certainly some motivation in this new plan that Bannon starts to talk about now, which seems to be wrapped up with what many are writing as an imminent announcement of a 2024 candidacy by Donald Trump. There's probably some fundraising element to it as well. Notice also that at one previous point in time, Steve Bannon promised 20,000 shock troops. Now he's down to 4,000. Maybe recruiting isn't going particularly well. But this is what happens when you don't properly punish a coup attempt and make sure that everybody knows that even at the top level, there's going to be consequences. Yes, the patsies in the Capitol, they got arrested. They're getting charged. Some of them are going to prison. But if you don't punish the people at the top level, it's going to continue. And you will see it stop when either the leaders are properly punished or the coup succeeds. And that latter option would be very, very bad. And of course, the fear is with a 6-3 Supreme Court in your favor, that the success of the coup will take place in 2024 going into 2025. Bannon's dangerous. Bannon should be in prison. But even being in prison, where he will likely spend some time, or jail, we'll find out about that. His sentencing is in October. he still will likely be able to wield influence. And one of the things judges are supposed to do when they sentence individuals is consider whether they're remorseful and consider whether they're likely to break the law again. Steve Bannon is not remorseful, and Steve Bannon is openly saying he is going to continue getting involved in all sorts of horrible things. He's itching to do more harm, and he should get the maximum sentence. He'll probably end up with the minimum, which I believe is 30 days. I have an incredible story for you here. This is a story not only of potential domestic violence, sadly, but also yet again of the projection that is they are going to commit voter fraud. We have now learned of a man whose wife is missing, and he is a suspect in her disappearance, who has pled guilty to casting her ballot for Trump in 2020. This is the voter fraud that they claim exists exclusively on the left, and yet law enforcement seems to only be able to find Republicans committing voter fraud. The Hill reports, man with missing wife pleads guilty to casting her ballot for Trump in 2020. A man who was tried in connection to his wife's disappearance pleaded guilty Thursday to submitting a fraudulent ballot on her behalf for Trump during the 2020 election. This is Barry Morphew, who said to law enforcement he figured all these other guys are cheating. My wife, Suzanne, would have voted for Trump, so I'm going to submit a ballot for her. The defendant was arrested in May of 2021, but was already in police custody because of his suspected role in his wife's disappearance. Okay, the suspicion is he killed his wife. Morphew was offered a plea deal allowing charges of attempting to influence a public servant and elections offense to be dropped if he pled guilty to the forgery charge. He faces a year of supervised probation for the charge. The murder case against Barry Morphew was dismissed without prejudice after Suzanne Morphew's body was unable to be located. So understand that we have no particular reason to think he didn't kill his wife. There just was no body. And in this particular case, there was not enough of a circumstantial case. Sometimes you see murder cases go forward with no body. And sometimes you even see guilty verdicts with no body. But in this case, there was no such case to be made. Suzanne Morphew disappeared in May of 2020 and has not been recovered. However, law enforcement said last year they believe they are close to discovering the victim's body. Think about that. He said to law enforcement, listen, everybody else is cheating. I know my wife would have voted for Trump, so I decided to submit the vote for her anyway. That's a crime, okay? Maybe the wife didn't really want to vote for Trump, and he killed her and then voted for Trump in her name. Maybe. We don't really know. Understand the projection that is constantly happening. Republican leaders and Trump spend 2020 saying there is massive fraud happening by Democrats. And so some Republican voters say, screw it. If the Democrats are going to cheat, we're going to cheat too. And then law enforcement shows up and says, we don't find any Democrats doing this. We only are able to find Republicans doing this. Some to, quote, test the system, and some because they are just genuinely committing voter fraud. The very voter fraud that they say it is the left that is being committed by the left. These people are incredible. And if they are allowed to do it again, they will. And if they're able to succeed, we're really screwed. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a caller accurately identifying that right-wingers are better than left-wingers at firing up their bases.
Hello, David. Great show. Listen all the time.
Thank you.
This is Brent, and my question is, it seems like every weekend the Republicans and the MAGA radicals are holding a rally, either a Trump rally or a CPAC rally or a Turning Point rally. It's just rally after rally after rally. However, you don't see any of this on the left. Is that a bigger problem, or am I the only one that thinks that's a problem, that the right has all these ridiculous rallies and seems to rile up the base, and the left has nothing to counter that?
I have been saying this for years. The pyrotechnics, the wrestling style introductions, the explosive music, everything. It's all pathetically cringeworthy, and we all recognize it as such. And also, it is more of the evidence. These are greater and greater examples of how the right creates community and funds this stuff to activate and engage and inspire and fire people up in a way that the left does not. Now, I'm not suggesting that we try to fire people up in the exact same way. I mean, a lot of this stuff, it appeals to the right more than it appeals to the left. So I'm not saying we do the same thing, but the left would greatly benefit from a decision that we have to pour more money into activating, engaging, and inspiring people. And if we don't, we're going to lose the ground game, and we continue to lose it in many ways. So yeah, the caller is 100% correct. On today's bonus show,
Pac-Man's a loser.
I know, Alex Jones hates the bonus show. We are going to talk about Steve Bannon's 2 guilty counts and his likely sentence. We are going to talk about new sex education books rejected by a Florida school board. And we will talk about support from 2/3 of Americans for term limits in the Supreme Court. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpacman.com.